The U.S. National Park System protects 85 million acres of untouched wilderness. For millions, it's a paradise. But for some, the forest floor becomes a final resting place. Today, we're covering the 10 most disturbing national park disappearances, cases where logic fails and the wild takes over. If you love deep dives into high strangeness and want to support the channel, please hit that subscribe button and like the video. It really helps us out. Now, pack your gear, stay on the trail, and let's get into it. July 19, 1991. The San Bernardino Mountains, California. If you've ever driven from Los Angeles to Palm Springs, you've seen this mountain looming on your left, Mount San Gorgonio, Old Grayback to the locals. At 11,500 feet, it's the tallest peak in Southern California. From the highway, it looks accessible, almost friendly. That's the lie the mountain tells. Up close, San Gorgonio is a different beast entirely. The trail to the summit is a grueling 16-mile round trip that gains over 4,000 feet of elevation. We're talking about thin air that makes your lungs burn, switchbacks that seem to go on forever, and terrain that shifts from desert scrub to alpine wilderness in the span of a few miles. Even experienced hikers call it brutal. On this particular Friday, a Boy Scout troop from San Bernardino is attempting the summit. Among them is 12-year-old Jared Negrete. Let me tell you about Jared. He's not your typical athletic scout. He's a bit portly, wears glasses, carries a disposable camera everywhere. He's the kid who's always a few steps behind the group, but he never complains. He's shy, follows rules to the letter, and trusts adults completely. His mom would later describe him as the kind of boy who would wait exactly where you told him to wait, for as long as you told him to wait. That trust would seal his fate. The troop starts their ascent early in the morning. It's July, so even at elevation, the sun is punishing. The group is moving well, but Jared is struggling. Now, this is his first overnight backpacking trip. Think about that. Not just a day hike, but his first time carrying a full pack up a mountain. At 12 years old, at his fitness level, at this altitude, his body is screaming at him to stop. Here's where the adult leaders make a decision that probably seemed reasonable at the time. They're maybe 2 miles from the summit. The stronger boys are anxious to make it to the top. Jared is slowing them down, and he's clearly suffering. So the scoutmaster tells Jared to stop and rest at a specific spot on the trail. "Wait right here," he says. "We'll pick you up on the way back down." Let's pause here and think about this moment. You're 12 years old, you're exhausted. An adult you trust has just told you to sit on this exact spot and wait, so you wait. The group continues up, and you watch them disappear around the next switchback. The sound of their voices fades, and then silence. Just you, the mountain, and that thin alpine air. The troop makes it to the summit. They take their photos, sign the register, eat their summit snacks. The whole celebration takes maybe 45 minutes. Then, they start heading back down, probably moving faster now, eager to collect Jared and get back to camp before dark. They reach the spot where they left him. He's gone. At first, no one panics. Boys wander off to use the bathroom. Maybe he got bored and walked down a bit. They call his name. Nothing. They search the immediate area. Nothing. As the minutes tick by, the calling gets louder, more frantic. The sun is starting to angle low. At this elevation, once that sun drops behind the peaks, the temperature plummets from 75 degrees to near freezing in an hour. The search begins immediately. And I mean immediately. This isn't one of those cases where nobody noticed for days. Within hours, search and rescue is mobilized. By the next morning, we're talking helicopters, dog teams, hundreds of volunteers combing every inch of trail. But here's the thing about searching for someone in the San Gorgonio wilderness. The terrain is what they call technical. You've got steep granite faces, loose scree slopes that you can slide down but can't climb back up, and these things called false trails, paths that look legitimate but lead you into box canyons or off cliffs. A 12-year-old boy following what he thinks is a shortcut could be in trouble within minutes. The searchers find something almost immediately, and this is where the story turns dark. They discovered Jared's backpack. Inside, they find the expected stuff: some food, water, extra clothes, and his camera. A yellow Kodak disposable camera with 24 exposures. When they develop that film, that's when everyone's blood runs cold. The first half of the roll is normal. Photos from earlier in the trip, Jared with his troop, some scenery shots, typical kid stuff. But then there are 12 photos taken after he went missing, after he was alone on that mountain. Most of these 12 are landscapes, blurry shots of trees, the sky, rocks. The kind of photos you'd expect from a scared kid trying to document his surroundings, maybe hoping to help rescuers find him. But it's photo number 19 that stops everyone cold. It's a close-up of Jared's face, specifically his eyes and nose filling the entire frame. The flash was used, which means this photo was taken in darkness, complete darkness. Now, let's think about this logically. You're a 12-year-old boy, lost and alone on a mountain at night. You have a camera with a flash. What do you do with that flash? You use it to see where you're going, right? You point it outward to illuminate the trail, to check for animals, to signal for help. You don't point it at your own face. That would blind you, waste the flash, and serve no survival purpose whatsoever. Unless you're checking to see if you're injured, unless you're so disoriented you don't know what you're doing. Or, and this is the thought that keeps investigators awake, unless you're not the one in control of the camera. But wait, it gets stranger. Search teams find footprints that they believe belong to Jared. These tracks show him pacing back and forth on a ridge about a half-mile from where he was told to wait. Back and forth, like he's looking for something or waiting for someone. And then the tracks just stop. Not at a cliff edge, not at a stream. They just stop in the middle of a relatively flat area. Here's what doesn't make sense. If Jared was following the rules, and everyone says he was that kind of kid, he would have stayed put. But he clearly moved. So something made him break that cardinal rule. Fear? Did he hear something? See something? And let's talk about that camera flash for a second. In 1991, disposable camera flashes aren't like your phone flashlight. They're one bright burst, then darkness while it recharges. If you're using it for light, you get maybe 1 second of visibility, then you're blind again. It's the worst possible light source unless you're trying to signal someone, or unless something else is happening in that darkness that we can't understand. Some searchers reported finding candy wrappers and beef jerky packaging scattered along various trails. This suggests Jared was mobile for a while, eating his supplies, trying to self-rescue. But if he was walking and eating, why didn't he walk down? The trail down is obvious. It's the same one they came up. Even in the dark, you can feel the grade under your feet. Downhill equals safety. Unless he couldn't go down. Unless something was blocking his path, real or imagined. The search continued for weeks. They brought in specialists who knew every hidden canyon, every seasonal stream, every place a body could be concealed. They found nothing. No clothing, no bones, no further trace beyond that backpack and those enigmatic photos. There's one detail that haunts me. Searchers described finding what looked like a nest, a spot where someone had clearly bedded down for a night, trying to stay warm. But it was in a bizarre location, far from any trail, in an area that made no logical sense for someone trying to get back to camp. It's like Jared was deliberately hiding rather than trying to be found. Let me give you the rational explanations, and then let me tell you why they don't quite work. Theory 1. Jared got impatient, tried to follow the troop, took a wrong turn, and fell into one of the many ravines. Okay, but bodies don't just disappear. Even in the deepest ravine, even after decades, you find bones, clothing, something. The area has been searched dozens of times since 1991. Theory 2. Animal predation. Mountain lions are up there, but they don't consume everything. They leave kills in characteristic ways. No blood, no torn clothing, no drag marks, nothing. Theory 3. Jared walked out and was abducted at a trailhead, except all the trailheads were monitored within hours of his disappearance. And that photo of his face was taken at night on the mountain, not in a vehicle or building. Here's what really bothers me about this case. That final photograph. A 12-year-old boy, lost and terrified in the dark, doesn't take a selfie. This is 1991, remember? Kids aren't taking pictures of themselves, and the composition is so specific, just the eyes and nose centered in frame. It's almost like someone else was holding the camera, checking to see if the boy was still conscious, still alive. Or maybe, and this is somehow worse, Jared was so disoriented from dehydration and altitude that he forgot which way the camera pointed. Maybe in his confused state, he thought he was photographing something in front of him, not realizing he'd turned the camera around. The image capture becomes an accident, the final record of a child whose mind was already slipping away. Jared Negrete never came down from Mount San Gorgonio. Somewhere up there, probably within a mile of where he was told to wait, is the answer to what happened. But the mountain keeps its secrets. His mother still hikes those trails, still searches, still hopes. She carries his picture and shows it to every hiker she meets. Because mothers don't stop looking, even when everyone else has given up. That photograph, those eyes staring out from nearly 35 years ago, they're still looking back at us, asking a question we can't answer. What happened after the flash went off? A 12-year-old boy was told to wait on a mountain trail. He did what he was told, until something made him break that one simple rule. And then he vanished into the granite and shadow of San Gorgonio, leaving behind only questions and a single, terrifying glimpse of his own frightened eyes in the darkness. He's still up there, somewhere. July 18th, 2007. The Bitterroot Mountains, Montana. If you've never been to this part of the country, let me paint you a picture. This is what they call big sky country, and they're not kidding. The sky seems impossibly vast, stretched like blue canvas over jagged peaks that look like they could cut clouds. The Bear Creek Overlook Trail, where our story takes place, is one of those hidden gems locals don't tell tourists about. It winds through lodgepole pines that smell like vanilla in the summer heat, past wildflower meadows that look like something out of a nature documentary. But here's the thing about beauty in the Bitterroots. It's got teeth. This is grizzly country, mountain lion territory, the kind of wilderness where hikers carry bear spray and make noise on blind corners. The kind of place where experienced outdoorsmen still feel that primal tingle on the back of their neck that says, "You're not the apex predator here." Which brings us to Barbara Bullock, 55 years old, living in Corvallis, Montana. This wasn't some tourist from the suburbs getting in over her head. Barbara was a Montana woman through and through, former air traffic controller, a job that requires intense focus and situational awareness. She hiked these trails regularly. She knew the dangers. And most importantly, she came prepared. Let me be specific about what prepared means. Barbara wasn't just carrying bear spray like your average hiker. She had a 3x50 Magnum revolver in her backpack. That's a serious gun. A loud gun. A gun that can stop a charging grizzly if you place your shots right. This is a woman who understood that the Bitterroot Mountains, for all their beauty, are not a theme park. They're wild, they're dangerous, and sometimes you need more than good intentions to come home alive. On this particular Wednesday morning, Barbara is playing tour guide. Her friend Jim Ramaker is visiting from California, and she wants to show him her favorite trail, the Bear Creek Overlook. It's about 2.5 miles to the Overlook, moderate difficulty, with an elevation gain that gets your heart pumping, but won't kill you. The payoff is spectacular. A view of the Bear Creek Canyon that makes people stop mid-sentence and just stare. They start early to beat the heat. The morning is perfect. Clear skies, temperature in the low 70s, just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes away. They're making good time, chatting as they walk. Jim's impressed with the trail, the views, the whole Montana experience. This is exactly what Barbara wanted, to share this piece of paradise with someone who'd appreciate it. They're about 1.5 miles in when they reach a particularly scenic spot. Jim stops to look at the view, maybe take a photo, just soak it in. Barbara is right behind him, maybe 20 to 30 feet back on the trail, close enough that they could have a conversation without raising their voices, close enough that if you screamed, the other person wouldn't just hear it, it would hurt their ears. Now, this is where things get impossible. Jim turns his head away from Barbara to look at the view. He's very specific about this later. He didn't walk away, didn't climb onto a rock, didn't go around a corner. He simply turned his head. He estimates he looked away for less than a minute. Most investigators think it was probably 45 seconds, maybe even less, the time it takes to appreciate a view and maybe snap a mental photograph. He turns back to say something to Barbara, maybe to point out a particular peak, maybe to comment on the view. But Barbara isn't there. Let's stop here and think about what "isn't there" means. We're not talking about she walked around a corner or she's behind a tree. We're talking about a complete absence. No Barbara, no movement in the bushes, no sound of footsteps on the trail, nothing. Jim's first thought is probably that she stepped off the trail for a bathroom break. It happens. You don't always announce it, so he waits a few seconds, expecting her to emerge from behind a tree. Nothing. He calls her name, not panicked yet, just a casual, "Barbara?" Nothing. Now the confusion sets in. He walks back down the trail a bit, thinking maybe she decided to look at something they'd passed. Nothing. He walks forward, thinking maybe she somehow passed him while he was distracted. Nothing. His calls get louder. "Barbara! Barbara!" The silence is total, and I need you to understand what silence means in this context. The Bitterroot Forest is never truly quiet. There are birds, insects, the rustle of small animals, the whisper of wind through pine needles. But human movement, that makes distinctive sounds. Footsteps on a trail, the swish of hiking pants, the jingle of gear, even someone trying to move silently makes noise. But Jim hears absolutely nothing. Here's where the physics of this situation completely breaks down. For Barbara to vanish from sight in 45 seconds, she would have had to move fast, running basically. But running makes noise. Boots on dirt, breathing, branches breaking. Even if she had sprinted at full speed the moment Jim looked away, he should have heard something. But let's say she didn't run. Let's say something took her. A mountain lion, which are absolutely present in the Bitterroots. These cats are ambush predators. They can be silent until the moment of attack. But here's the thing. The attack itself isn't silent. There's the impact, the struggle, the sound of a body being dragged, and most importantly, humans don't go down without a fight. They scream, they thrash, they make noise. And remember that .357 Magnum? If Barbara saw a predator coming, her first instinct would be to reach for it. Even if she didn't have time to draw and fire, her hand would have gone for that gun. But the gun vanished with her. No shots were fired. Jim would have heard that from miles away, let alone 30 feet. So maybe she fell? The trail has some steep drop-offs, a single misstep, a moment of vertigo, and you're gone. But falls make noise too. The crash of a body through brush, the clatter of rocks, the involuntary gasp or scream as you lose your footing. And when someone falls, they leave evidence. Disturbed earth at the edge, broken branches, scuff marks. Search and rescue found none of that. Within hours, this place is crawling with searchers. We're talking professional search and rescue teams, volunteers, helicopters, search dogs. And the dogs are important here because they're trained to find human scent. They can track someone through dense forest, across streams, up cliff faces. But the dogs found nothing. Not a trail leading away, not a scent pool where she might have stood. Nothing. It's as if Barbara Bollock simply ceased to exist at that spot on the trail. Now, I know what you're thinking, because everyone thinks it. Jim Ramaker was the only witness. He was the last person to see Barbara alive. In any disappearance, you look at the last person to see the victim. Police did, extensively. Jim cooperated fully, took polygraphs, provided a consistent account that never varied. There was no physical evidence of foul play, no blood, no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds on Jim. His story, as impossible as it sounds, checked out. But here's what really bothers me about this case, the time frame. 45 seconds. I want you to count that out right now. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, keep going to 45. That's not a lot of time. That's barely enough time to walk 100 feet at a normal pace. It's not enough time to have an argument, commit a crime, and hide a body. It's not enough time for Barbara to have second thoughts about the hike and secretly run back to the car. It's just enough time for someone to stop existing. The search continued for weeks. They brought in cadaver dogs, helicopter teams with infrared cameras, volunteers who walked shoulder to shoulder through the brush. They searched mine shafts, caves, ravines. They dragged nearby water sources. They found nothing. Not a piece of clothing, not a footprint, not a single trace that Barbara Bullock had ever been on that mountain after Jim looked away. There's one theory that investigators reluctantly consider: human abduction, someone hiding in the forest, waiting for the perfect moment. They grab Barbara the instant Jim looks away, hand over her mouth, knife to her throat, forcing her silently into the woods. It's possible, technically, but it requires a level of planning and precision that's almost inhuman. You'd have to know the trail, know someone was coming, position yourself perfectly, and execute a completely silent abduction in broad daylight 30 feet from a witness. And then vanish into the wilderness, carrying or controlling a grown woman with a gun. Some locals tell you about the Bitterroots being thin places where reality isn't quite as solid as it should be. Native American tribes have stories about these mountains, about places where people can step out of our world and into something else. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just telling you what people who live there whisper about when another hiker vanishes without a trace. But let's stick to the facts. A 55-year-old woman, armed and experienced, vanished in 45 seconds in broad daylight. She made no sound. She left no trail. Professional searchers with modern technology and trained dogs found absolutely nothing. It's as if the mountain just erased her from existence. Jim Ramaker still hikes, they say, but never alone and never in the Bitterroots. He spent years replaying those 45 seconds in his mind, wondering what would have happened if he hadn't looked away. If he'd kept Barbara in his peripheral vision, if he'd suggested a different trail that day. Here's what keeps me up at night about this case. Barbara Bullock wasn't unprepared. She wasn't careless. She wasn't in a dangerous situation. She was on a familiar trail, in good weather, with a companion, carrying a gun, in a place she knew well. She did everything right, and it didn't matter. Whatever happened in those 45 seconds, whether it was predator or person or something we don't have a word for, it was fast enough and silent enough to take an armed woman 30 feet from safety. And that's the truly terrifying part. If it could happen to Barbara Bullock on a sunny morning on a familiar trail, it could happen to anyone. Somewhere in the Bitterroot Mountains, there's an answer to what happened in those 45 seconds. But the mountains aren't talking. They never do. Barbara Bullock stepped behind Jim Ramaker on a Wednesday morning in July and stepped out of our world entirely. No sound, no struggle, no goodbye. Just gone. As if she never existed at all. September 2014, the Crazy Mountains, Montana. If you want to understand what happened to Aaron Hedges, you first need to understand these mountains. The Crazies, that's what locals call them, rise like a fortress of jagged granite from the plains east of Livingston. They're not part of a larger range. They just erupt from the earth, isolated and imposing, like nature's middle finger to the surrounding farmland. The Crow Indians call them the Crazy Woman Mountains, and they consider them sacred. Vision Quest territory. The kind of place where young warriors would go to fast and pray and see things that aren't normally there. Even today, ranchers who've lived in their shadow for generations will tell you there's something off about the Crazies. Compasses act weird. Experienced hunters get turned around. People see things that shouldn't be there and don't see things that should. But Aaron Hedges wasn't some superstitious local or inexperienced day hiker. This was a 38-year-old man from Bozeman who knew his way around the Montana backcountry, an experienced elk hunter, the kind of guy who could read topographic maps, use a GPS, understand weather patterns. He was hunting with friends who were equally experienced. These weren't city boys playing mountain man for the weekend. These were serious hunters who knew the risks and how to mitigate them. The hunting trip started normally enough. Early September in Montana means elk season, and the group had established their camp in the Crazies, ready for several days of hunting. The weather was typical for early fall, crisp mornings, warm afternoons, the aspens just starting to turn gold. Perfect hunting weather, really. On September 7th, Aaron and his hunting partners split up. Now, Let me be clear. This is completely normal in elk hunting. You cover more ground that way, and you're less likely to spook the animals. Everyone has radios, everyone knows the plan, everyone's supposed to meet back at camp at a designated time. It's a system that works thousands of times every hunting season across the Mountain West. Aaron radios his friends around midday. His voice is calm, maybe a little tired. He tells them he's exhausted and heading back to their supply cache to rest. He gives his location. He's clear about where he is. The friends acknowledge. No problem. They'll see him back at camp. But here's where the mountains show their teeth. Within hours, the weather turns. We're not talking about a little rain shower. This is Montana in September, where winter can show up 3 months early without warning. A serious snowstorm rolls in, the kind that turns familiar landmarks into an alien landscape. Visibility drops to nothing. The temperature plummets. When Aaron's hunting partners make it back to camp through the storm, they expect to find him there, probably already in his sleeping bag, warming up. But Aaron isn't there. The cache hasn't been touched. His gear's exactly where they left it that morning. At first, they're not panicked. Aaron's experienced. He probably hunkered down somewhere to wait out the worst of the storm. That's what you do. You find shelter, you stay put, you don't wander around in a whiteout. They wait. The storm passes. Aaron doesn't show up. Now, the real search begins. They focus on the area where Aaron said he was during that radio call. They're looking for the logical places, overhangs where he might have sheltered, game trails he might have followed, the direct routes back to camp. They find nothing. No tracks, no gear, no sign he was ever there. The official search escalates. Search and rescue, helicopters when the weather clears, dog teams. They're searching in an organized grid pattern from where Aaron said he was. Days turn into weeks. Nothing. It's like he vanished into the storm itself. Then, 9 months later, in June 2015, a rancher finds something bizarre: Aaron's boots and his water bladder. But here's the thing, they're in completely the wrong place. Miles from where Aaron said he was, and more importantly, in the opposite direction from camp. Aaron told his friends he was heading east toward their cache. These boots are found to the north, deeper into the mountains. Let's talk about these boots for a second, because this is where the story goes from strange to incomprehensible. These aren't just dropped on the trail. There's evidence of a small fire near them, like Aaron stopped, made a fire, and then took his boots off and walked away. In the snow, barefoot. Now, there's a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing that happens with severe hypothermia. Your body gets so cold that your nerve endings misfire, and you suddenly feel like you're burning up. Victims strip off their clothes, thinking they're overheating. But here's what doesn't fit. Paradoxical undressing victims typically strip everything. They're found naked. Aaron only removed his boots. His other clothes were still on when his remains were eventually found. So why just the boots? And then there's the distance problem. From where those boots were found to where Aaron's remains were eventually discovered, we're talking about miles of brutal terrain. Rocky, steep, covered in snow. Try walking barefoot on gravel sometime. Now imagine doing it for miles in freezing temperatures, through snow, over sharp rocks and rough ground. Your feet would be hamburger within the first few 100 yards. Yet somehow, Aaron kept going. They find his thermos in another location entirely, like he was dropping breadcrumbs, but the trail makes no sense. It doesn't lead toward camp, doesn't lead toward any road or trail, doesn't lead toward shelter. It's like he was wandering randomly or being led in circles. In August 2016, nearly 2 years after he disappeared, hunters find human remains. Skull, bones, scattered by animals, but definitely human. DNA confirms it's Aaron Hedges. But here's the gut punch. He's found only a few miles from a ranch. Close enough that on a clear night he could have seen the lights. Close enough that if he'd walked in a straight line in almost any direction from where his boots were found, he would have hit a road or a building. Think about that. An experienced hunter, someone who understands survival, someone who knows that civilization is downhill, that following water leads to people, that roads and ranches dot the valleys around the crazies. This man walked in circles until he died, when safety was just a few miles away. The official explanation is that Aaron got disoriented in the storm, became hypothermic, paradoxically undressed, and wandered confused until he died. But that explanation has some serious holes. First, the distance. Hypothermic people don't usually walk for miles, especially barefoot. They burrow, they hide, they curl up and die. Aaron covered an incredible distance in impossible conditions without proper footwear. Second, the direction. Even confused, humans have an instinct to go downhill when lost. Water flows downhill, civilization is downhill, safety is downhill. Aaron somehow went sideways, parallel to the valleys, like he was being kept in the mountains. Third, the timeline. For Aaron to walk that far, he had to survive the initial storm. He had to be functional enough to make that fire where he left his boots. This wasn't someone who immediately succumbed to the elements. This was someone who survived for a while and then made a series of inexplicable decisions that led to his death. Some of the local ranchers will tell you, off the record, that the crazies don't let everyone go. They'll tell you about other hunters who've walked in circles for days, swearing they were walking straight, about compasses that spin, GPS units that give impossible readings, about voices that call you deeper into the mountains when you're trying to get out. But let's stick to what we know for certain. Aaron Hedges, an experienced outdoorsman, radios his friends with his location. A storm hits. He's never seen alive again. His boots are found miles in the wrong direction, abandoned after he made a fire. His remains are found even further away, close enough to safety that it's agonizing to contemplate. Somewhere in between, he walked barefoot through snow and rough terrain, dropping his thermos like a waypoint to nowhere. The map of Aaron's final journey doesn't make sense. It's not the path of someone trying to survive. It's not the path of someone who knows where they are or where they're going. It's the path of someone being led by something we don't understand. We're following a logic that doesn't exist in our world. The crazy mountains took Aaron Hedges on a walk. Not toward safety, not toward shelter, not toward any logical destination, just around and around, barefoot in the snow until he couldn't walk anymore. And then they kept him hidden for 2 years, only a few miles from the ranch lights that could have saved him. They call them the Crazy Mountains for a reason. Aaron Hedges learned why, but he took that knowledge with him when he sat down in the snow for the last time, looked at the lights of safety in the distance, and closed his eyes forever. The mountains kept his boots as a souvenir. They always keep something. July 1996, the High Sierra of California, Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. If you've never been to this part of the world, it's hard to explain just how massive and unforgiving it is. We're talking about granite peaks that pierce the sky at 14,000 feet, alpine lakes so clear you can count the trout from the shore, and wilderness so vast that you can walk for days without seeing another human being. It's beautiful, it's spiritual, and it will kill you without hesitation if you make one wrong move. But Randy Morganson didn't make wrong moves, not in these mountains. Let me tell you about Randy. At 54 years old, he wasn't just a backcountry ranger, he was the backcountry ranger. 28 seasons in the High Sierra. Think about that. 28 years of navigating these peaks, rescuing lost hikers, teaching younger rangers how to survive above the tree line. His colleagues called him the Obi-Wan Kenobi of the high country, and they weren't exaggerating. Here's a story that tells you everything about Randy's abilities. A Boy Scout goes missing in the park. The search teams are baffled. Randy looks at a topographic map, runs his finger along the contour lines like he's reading Braille, and says, "Check this meadow." He gives exact coordinates. The helicopter flies there. The kid is exactly where Randy said he'd be. That's not luck. That's someone who understood how terrain thinks, how lost people move, how the mountain pulls you in certain directions when you're panicked. Randy's station that summer was near Bench Lake, around 10,000 feet elevation. It's spectacular country, but isolated, the kind of place where you might not see another person for weeks. He lived in a small ranger station, really just a tent structure, doing what he'd done for nearly 3 decades, checking permits, helping hikers, being the thin green line between wilderness and chaos. On July 20th, a Saturday evening, Randy makes his routine radio check with dispatch. His voice is calm, professional. Everything's normal. He signs off. This is the last time anyone hears from James Randall Morganson. Now, missing a radio check isn't immediately cause for panic. The High Sierra is full of dead zones where radio signals can't penetrate. Rangers know this. So when Randy doesn't check in on July 21st, dispatch makes a note but isn't worried. When he misses the check on July 22nd, they start to feel uneasy. By July 23rd, when he's missed multiple scheduled contacts, they know something's wrong. Here's the thing about Randy disappearing. It would be like a fish forgetting how to swim. This man could navigate by stars, find water by watching birds, predict weather by the way wind moved through pine needles. He didn't get lost. He couldn't get lost. Not here. The search begins on July 24th, and this isn't just any search. These are Randy's friends, his protégés, people he'd trained, people who loved him. They know his habits, his favorite routes, where he liked to camp. They're not searching blind. They're searching with 28 years of Randy's patterns as their guide. But they find nothing. Not at first. When they reach his station at Bench Lake, they find something that makes everyone's blood run cold. Randy's badge, his National Park Service badge that he'd worn for almost 3 decades, is sitting on the table. His uniform shirt is there too, neatly placed. But here's what's strange. There's also a handwritten note on the tent flap saying he's gone on patrol. Why leave your badge if you're going on patrol? You need your badge on patrol. It's like a cop leaving their gun behind. The search intensifies. Helicopters, dog teams, hundreds of volunteers. They're covering every trail, every drainage, every possible route Randy could have taken. But here's what doesn't make sense. They're looking for the man who usually finds everyone else. Randy knew how people got lost. He knew where bodies ended up. If anyone could position themselves to be found, it would be Randy Morganson. Days turn to weeks. Weeks turn to months. The snow comes, forcing them to suspend the search. Randy's gone. But here's where we need to talk about what was happening in Randy's life that summer. See, the Zen master of the wilderness persona was real, but it was also a mask. Randy was going through a brutal divorce. His 20-year marriage was ending. He'd had an affair with a seasonal ranger that had ended badly. He was depressed, burnt out, questioning everything about his life. Investigators find something troubling at his house in the valley. There's a signed check on his desk, like he was settling his affairs. His personal effects are notably organized. These are the kinds of things people do when they're planning to not come back. 5 years pass. 5 years of Randy's friends and colleagues hiking past places where he might be, always looking, always wondering. Then, in July 2001, almost exactly 5 years after he vanished, 2 rangers are on a recovery mission for someone else when they spot something in a creek drainage. It's Randy. He's at the bottom of a cascade, a waterfall area near Window Peak. His backpack is still on. His radio is with him. The radio is switched on. Let me repeat that. The radio that could have saved his life was right there, turned on, functional. The location suggests he fell while crossing the creek. Maybe the snow bridge collapsed. Maybe he slipped on wet granite. The fall would have been violent, probably breaking his leg or back. But here's what haunts everyone. Even with a broken leg, even in agony, Randy could have called for help. The radio was right there. It was on. One button press, one Mayday call, and helicopters would have been there within hours. So why didn't he call? Theory 1. The fall killed him instantly. But the position of the body suggests he survived the fall, at least briefly. He had repositioned himself, possibly tried to get comfortable. This wasn't an instant death. Theory 2. The fall knocked him unconscious and he died before waking up. Possible, but Randy was found in a position that suggested conscious movement after the fall. Theory 3, and this is the one that keeps his friends awake at night, Randy chose not to call. He fell, he was hurt, he had the radio in his hand, and he made a decision. After 28 years of saving others, he decided not to save himself. But wait, let's look at this from another angle. If Randy was planning to end his life, why go through the charade of a patrol? Why leave a note saying you'll be back? Why take your backpack and supplies? Suicidal people in the wilderness typically don't die with their pack on, radio at the ready in full ranger mode, unless Randy didn't exactly plan it. Maybe he was hiking recklessly, taking chances he wouldn't normally take, subconsciously putting himself in danger. Maybe when the accident happened, he saw it as the mountain making the decision for him. There's another detail that bothers investigators. Randy knew this drainage. He'd probably crossed this exact creek dozens of times. The snow bridge that allegedly collapsed, Randy would have known how to test it, how to recognize weakness. This is like a NASCAR driver forgetting how to take a turn they've taken 1,000 times. The search teams had actually been in this drainage multiple times during those 5 years. How did they miss him? The body was visible from above once you knew where to look. Did the water hide him? Did snow cover him for years? Or, and this is a disturbing thought, was the universe itself conspiring to keep Randy hidden until it was time for him to be found? Some rangers who knew Randy have a different theory. They think he was testing something. Randy had an almost mystical relationship with the Sierra. He often talked about how the mountain decides things. Maybe he was testing whether the mountain wanted him to stay. He fell, had the radio, and waited to see if anyone would find him before he died. When no one came, he took it as his answer. The official cause of death is accidental drowning following a fall. Case closed. But everyone who knew Randy, everyone who understood his capabilities, has the same nagging doubt. The best tracker in the Sierra, the man who could find anyone, managed to die in a place where he couldn't be found for 5 years, with a working radio he never used. Here's what really gets me. Randy spent his life finding lost people. He understood the psychology of being lost better than anyone. He knew that lost people often die within sight of the trail, that they walk in circles, that they make irrational decisions. Did Randy, in his final moments, become one of his own case studies? Or did he orchestrate his own disappearance so perfectly that even he couldn't have found himself? The mountains Randy loved eventually claimed him. Whether he surrendered to them or fought until the end is a secret buried with him in that creek drainage. The radio, switched on, battery dead, never used, remains the most haunting piece of evidence. One button press, one call. That's all that stood between Randy Morganson and rescue. He chose silence. And in the High Sierra, silence is forever. June 9, 2013. Mesa Verde National Park, Colorado. It's a Sunday afternoon, and the park is exactly what you'd expect. Packed with families, tour buses, kids on summer vacation. The temperature is pushing past 100 degrees, that dry desert heat that makes you feel like you're standing in front of an open oven. The ancient ancestral pueblo and cliff dwellings shimmer in the heat, looking exactly like they do on the postcards. Dale Steeling, 51 years old, from Goliad, Texas, is here with his wife Deneen. They're doing the great American road trip thing, seeing the sights, taking pictures, enjoying retirement. Dale's a banker, not exactly the outdoorsy type, but he's in decent shape for a guy from sea-level Texas trying to hike at 7,000 feet in Colorado. Let me be really clear about something. Mesa Verde is not wilderness. This isn't like getting lost in the Rockies or the Amazon. This is a highly developed national park with paved trails, railings, interpretive signs every 50 feet, and more tourists per square yard than Disneyland on some days. The Spruce Tree House Trail, where Dale was headed, is literally a paved path. We're talking asphalt. Grandmothers with walkers do this trail. Kids in flip-flops do this trail. It's about 4:30 in the afternoon when Dale and Deneen finish up a ranger tour and get to the Spruce Tree House trailhead. The trail is a quarter mile down to the ruins, quarter mile back up. Round trip, including time to look at the cliff dwelling, maybe 45 minutes if you're really taking your time. Deneen looks at the trail, feels the heat, and makes a decision we've all made. You go ahead, honey. I'll wait here. She finds a shady spot near the parking area. Dale heads down the trail. He's wearing typical tourist clothes. Nothing special, nothing that would make him stand out in the crowd of other visitors. Now, here's what Dale's looking at. A well-defined trail that switchbacks down into a canyon. At the bottom, there's the Spruce Tree House ruins behind a fence. But Dale mentions he wants to see the petroglyphs, which are on a slightly longer loop trail. Still paved, still heavily trafficked, adds maybe 20 minutes to the hike. The Petroglyph Point Trail is 2.4 miles total, but it's a loop that brings you right back to where you started. Deneen waits. She's people watching, probably playing on her phone, enjoying the shade. 45 minutes pass. She starts looking for Dale among the faces coming back up the trail. An hour passes. She's getting annoyed. Typical Dale, probably reading every single interpretive sign. Hour and a half. Now she's concerned. She walks to the overlook, scans the trail below. No Dale. She asks people coming up, "Did you see a guy about this tall, gray hair, maybe struggling a bit in the heat?" Nobody remembers him specifically. There were dozens of middle-aged men on the trail. 2 hours. Denian alerts the rangers. The initial response is pretty relaxed. People get delayed on trails all the time. Maybe he's dehydrated, resting in the shade. Maybe he took a wrong turn, though honestly, how do you take a wrong turn on a paved loop trail? But they send a ranger down to check. The ranger walks the entire trail. No Dale. They check the ruins, the petroglyphs, the bathrooms. No Dale. Now the alarm bells start ringing. This isn't some vast wilderness where you can wander for miles. This is a contained canyon system with vertical walls. There are only so many places a human being can physically be. The search escalates fast. By evening, they've got teams covering every trail in the area. By the next morning, it's a full-scale operation. Helicopters, search dogs, technical rescue teams rappelling down cliff faces. They're not just looking for Dale, they're looking for any sign he existed. A footprint off the trail, a dropped water bottle, a piece of clothing caught on a branch. Nothing, absolutely nothing. But here's where it gets genuinely weird. The search dogs track Dale's scent down the trail to the petroglyph point area. Multiple dogs, multiple handlers, all hit the same spot. And then the scent just stops. Not gets confused or fades out. It stops. Like Dale just ceased to exist at that specific coordinate. Think about what that means. For a scent to stop completely, one of 3 things has to happen. The person got into a vehicle, impossible in that location. They went straight up, also impossible. Or they were carried away by something that didn't leave a scent trail, which is, what exactly? The search continues for weeks. They bring in specialists who know every hidden crevice, every possible fall zone. They use infrared cameras to scan for heat signatures. They check abandoned mine shafts, even though none are supposed to be in that area. They find nothing, not a single trace of Dale stealing. For 7 years, Dale's disappearance remains a complete mystery. His family pushes for continued searches. Online sleuths develop theories ranging from the plausible, medical emergency, to the bizarre, dimensional portals in Native American sacred sites. But there's no evidence for any of it. Then, in September 2020, a park employee is doing archaeological survey work in a remote section of the park. We're talking about an area that requires technical climbing to access, about 4.2 miles from where Dale was last seen. The employee spots something that doesn't belong, human remains. DNA confirms it's Dale stealing. Now, this is where your brain should break a little. Let's map this out. Dale walks down a paved tourist trail in a crowded park. Somehow, without being seen by dozens of other hikers, he leaves that trail. He then traverses over 4 miles of the most brutal terrain in the park. We're talking steep canyon walls, loose rock, dense vegetation, no trails, to end up in a spot that professional search teams with technical gear struggled to reach. Let me put this in perspective. Dale was 51, from Texas, at altitude, in 100-degree heat, presumably without significant water supplies, since he was just doing a 45-minute tourist walk. The location where his remains were found would be challenging for a fit 25-year-old with proper gear and plenty of water. How did Dale get there? Here's what doesn't make sense. If Dale was disoriented from heat stroke, he would have collapsed relatively quickly, probably near the trail. The body's response to severe dehydration and heat exhaustion is to stop moving, find shade, curl up. You don't hike 4 miles through impossible terrain. If Dale was trying to find help, he would have stayed on trails or headed toward visible structures. The park has buildings, roads, other people everywhere. You don't head deeper into trackless canyon country when you're looking for rescue. If Dale fell from the trail, his body would have been below the trail, not miles away in a different drainage system. And the search teams checked every possible fall zone multiple times. Some investigators think Dale might have experienced what's called terminal burrowing, a phenomenon where people in the final stages of hypothermia or heat stroke seek out small enclosed spaces. But that usually happens close to where the person was last seen, not miles away across incredibly difficult terrain. There's another theory that's even more disturbing. What if Dale didn't walk those 4 miles? What if something carried him? But what? There's no evidence of animal predation, no drag marks, no scattered belongings along a path, and no animal is going to carry a full-grown man 4 miles through that terrain. The Park Service keeps detailed records of every search. They searched the area where Dale was eventually found, multiple times, with dogs, with helicopters, with ground teams. How did they miss him? Was he somewhere else for those 7 years and then moved? Was he buried and then exposed by erosion? Or, and this is the thought that keeps investigators awake, was he somehow invisible until he wasn't? Here's what really haunts me about this case. Dale Stealing did everything right. He stuck to marked trails in a heavily visited park. He told someone where he was going. He was in a place with dozens of witnesses. And none of it mattered. He stepped onto a paved trail in broad daylight and ended up 4 miles away in a place that should have been impossible for him to reach. The ancient peoples who built the cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde disappeared too, leaving behind only their structures and their silence. They knew something about this landscape that we've forgotten. Maybe Dale found out what that was, but he took that knowledge with him into whatever canyon swallowed him for 7 years. Dale told his wife he'd be back in 45 minutes. She's still waiting for an explanation of where those 7 years went and how a banker from Texas managed to traverse impassable terrain to die in a place he never should have been able to reach. The desert keeps its secrets, and Dale Stealing became one of them. Mesa Verde means green table in Spanish, but for the Stealing family, it will always be the place where a routine tourist walk turned into a journey that defied physics, logic, and every rule of search and rescue. Dale went for a walk on a paved trail and ended up in eternity. The how and why remain locked in those ancient canyons, just another mystery in a place built on mysteries. June the 2nd, 2015, mile 213 on the Colorado River, deep in the Grand Canyon. If you've never been on a commercial rafting trip through the Grand Canyon, let me paint you a picture. By day 6 of an 8-day trip, everyone's in a groove. The initial fear of the rapids has been replaced by whooping excitement. The group has bonded over campfire stories and shared exhaustion. Everyone smells like sunscreen and river water. And nobody cares. It's paradise, if paradise involves Class 5 rapids and scorpions in your sleeping bag. Morgan Heimer is one of the guides for Tour West Rafting Company. 22 years old, blonde, athletic, the kind of guy who looks like he was born on a river. This isn't some summer job for him. He's a professional river guide, trained in swift water rescue, wilderness first aid, the works. He knows every rock, every eddy, every hydraulic feature of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. More importantly, he's wearing his PFD, his personal flotation device. That's a high-end life jacket designed to keep an unconscious person face up in turbulent water. The group has stopped at Pumpkin Springs, which, despite its innocent name, is a weird place. The spring itself is warm and mineral-rich, colored this unnatural orange from all the minerals. It's beautiful but toxic, high levels of arsenic, radium, lead, the kind of water that looks inviting but would poison you if you drank it. The spring feeds into the Colorado River, creating this surreal mixing zone where warm orange water meets cold green river water. It's afternoon, that lazy part of the day when you're digesting lunch and the sun is making everyone sleepy. Some clients are exploring the springs, taking photos. Others are napping on the boats. Morgan is doing what guides do during breaks, checking gear, making sure clients are hydrated, being professionally relaxed while actually staying vigilant. He's standing near the river's edge, talking to the trip leader. They're probably discussing the plan for the rest of the day, where they'll camp, which rapids are coming up, normal guide stuff. The location is important here. He's not standing on some precarious cliff. He's on relatively flat ground near the water, the kind of place where thousands of rafters safely stand every year. The trip leader turns away. Maybe to grab something from a dry bag, maybe to answer another client's question, maybe just to look at the scenery. The universal testimony is that this was a matter of seconds, not minutes, seconds. The time it takes to reach for a water bottle and turn back around. Morgan is gone. Now, the trip leader's first thought isn't panic. People step away for privacy all the time on these trips. Maybe Morgan went to use the camp toilet. Maybe he walked back to the boats to get something. So the trip leader continues with whatever they were doing. But after a few minutes, they call out, "Morgan, we're getting ready to push off." No response. Morgan? Nothing. The realization hits like ice water. On a river trip, you don't wander off. You especially don't wander off without telling someone. The guides start searching, and within minutes, everyone understands something is seriously wrong. Let's talk about the physics of what should be impossible here. The Colorado River at this point is powerful, but not particularly turbulent. It's what they call pool between rapids, moving fast but relatively smooth. If Morgan had slipped and fallen in, several things should have happened. First, the splash. A 180-pound man falling into water from standing height makes noise. A significant splash that someone standing a few feet away absolutely would have heard. The trip leader heard nothing. Second, the instinctive vocalization. When people fall unexpectedly, they gasp, yelp, or shout. It's involuntary. Even if Morgan was the strong silent type, the surprise of cold water would have forced some sound out of him. The trip leader heard nothing. Third, and this is crucial, Morgan was wearing a PFD. These aren't your recreational lake life jackets. These are professional-grade devices designed for exactly this environment. They have 22 pounds of buoyancy. They're bright orange or yellow. They're designed to flip an unconscious person face up and keep them that way. If Morgan went in the water, he should have popped up like a cork, visible and floating, even if unconscious. But here's the thing. Nobody saw him surface. Nobody saw an orange life jacket floating downstream. The other guides immediately started scanning the water, checking the eddies where objects get trapped, looking downstream for any sign of color. Nothing. The search becomes frantic. These guides know the river. They know where bodies go, where the current takes things, where people get trapped. They're checking the hydraulics, the undercuts, anywhere a person could be held underwater. Other rafting groups join the search. Park rangers are notified. Helicopters are brought in. For 3 days, they search. The river is scrutinized for miles downstream. Every beach, every eddy, every snag is checked and rechecked. Search and rescue teams are using techniques developed over decades of Grand Canyon recoveries. They find nothing. Then, 3 days after Morgan vanished, another rafting group finds something. A PFD, Morgan's PFD, is spotted in an eddy at mile 237. That's 24 miles downstream from where he disappeared. The life jacket is fully inflated. The buckles are still fastened. The straps are adjusted to Morgan's size. But Morgan isn't in it. Let me explain why this is impossible. You don't just slip out of a properly fastened PFD. These things are designed to stay on in the most violent water imaginable. The crotch straps prevent it from riding up. The chest buckles keep it secured. For Morgan to be out of his PFD while it remained buckled means one of 3 things. He unbuckled it, removed it, and then rebuckled it before throwing it in the river. Why would anyone do that? Someone else removed him from it and rebuckled it, which implies foul play, or he somehow compressed his body enough to slip out while it was buckled, physically nearly impossible for an adult man. The search continues for weeks. Dive teams check the deeper pools. Helicopters fly the canyon daily. Other rafting groups are on alert. The Grand Canyon is a tight community. Everyone's looking for Morgan. But here's what makes this even stranger. Bodies in the Grand Canyon don't usually stay hidden. The river gives them back. The current, the gases from decomposition, the natural buoyancy. Bodies surface. They wash up on beaches. They get caught in eddies. Sometimes it takes days or weeks, but the river almost always returns them. Morgan Heimer has never been found. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not a single trace beyond that empty life jacket. So what happened in those few seconds when the trip leader looked away? Theory 1. Morgan had a medical event, seizure, heart attack, stroke, and fell in the river. But this doesn't explain the silence, the lack of splash, or how he got out of his PFD. Theory 2. He was pulled in by a flash hydraulic or freak current, but Pumpkin Springs isn't known for those, and again, his PFD should have brought him up. Theory 3. Suicide. But Morgan showed no signs of depression, was excited about the trip, and had plans for after the season. Plus, drowning yourself while wearing a PFD is nearly impossible. That's literally what they're designed to prevent. Theory 4. Murder. But who? The trip leader was right there and saw nothing. The clients barely knew him. And how do you silently murder someone in broad daylight and dispose of the body so perfectly that extensive searches find nothing? There's one detail that haunts me. Pumpkin Springs, with its toxic, mineral-rich water, creates these weird underwater visibility conditions. The warm water rises, the cold water sinks, creating layers that can hide things. Some divers have reported that the mixing waters create optical illusions, places where you can't see clearly, even with a mask. Is it possible Morgan's body is right there, at Pumpkin Springs, hidden in some thermal layer or mineral cloud that searchers can't penetrate? The other guides on that trip still work the river. They still stop at Pumpkin Springs. But now they count heads obsessively. They never turn their backs on anyone near the water. Because they know something that most people don't. The river can take you in the time it takes to blink, and sometimes it doesn't give you back. Morgan Heimer was standing on solid ground, wearing professional safety equipment, surrounded by experts, in good weather, in calm conditions. He was visible one second and gone the next, as if the earth opened up and swallowed him. No transition, no struggle, no goodbye. Just there. And then not there. The Colorado River has claimed many lives over the years. Usually it's dramatic. People swept away in rapids, pinned against rocks, pulled into hydraulics. But Morgan's disappearance was different. It was silent, instant, and complete. It's the kind of disappearance that makes you question whether the laws of physics apply equally everywhere, or whether there are places where reality just works differently. Somewhere between mile 213 and mile 237, the river knows what happened to Morgan Heimer. But rivers don't talk. They just keep flowing, carrying their secrets toward the sea, leaving us with an empty life jacket and an impossible mystery. The next time someone tells you to never turn your back on the ocean, remember Morgan Heimer and add this: never turn your back on the river either. Because in the time it takes to reach for a water bottle, someone can step out of this world entirely, leaving only questions behind. June 24, 2010, Joshua Tree National Park, California. If you've never been to Joshua Tree in summer, let me tell you what you're dealing with. This isn't your friendly neighborhood desert. This is the Mojave at its most hostile. Temperatures pushing 110 degrees, humidity so low your lips crack within minutes, and a landscape that looks like Mars had a baby with a Salvador Dali painting. Those famous Joshua trees, they look like they're screaming. The boulder formations, they're house-sized rock piles that create a maze where every canyon looks exactly like the last one. Billy Wasco knew all this. At 66 years old, this wasn't some rookie from the city who thought desert hiking meant a stroll with a water bottle. Bill was from Georgia, but he was an experienced hiker who understood preparation. He'd driven out from Atlanta specifically for this trip, and like the meticulous planner he was, he left his wife Mary a detailed itinerary. He was going to do a day hike in Joshua Tree, probably Carey's Castle or Quail Mountain, both challenging but doable trails, and he'd call her by 5 p.m. when he got back to his car. Bill parks his rental car at the Juniper Flats Backcountry Board early that morning. He signs the trail register, Bill Owasco, but doesn't indicate which trail he's taking. This isn't unusual. A lot of hikers don't. He's got water, a cell phone, proper gear. He looks like every other prepared day hiker heading into the park. 5 p.m. comes and goes. No call from Bill. Mary waits. Maybe he's running late. Maybe there's no cell service. But Bill is punctual, obsessively so. By evening, she knows something's wrong. She calls the park service. Now, Joshua Tree gets missing hiker reports fairly regularly. Usually the person is found within hours, dehydrated and embarrassed. The rangers start with the standard protocol. They find Bill's car at Juniper Flats, exactly where it should be. It's locked, No signs of struggle, no note. They figure he's on one of the nearby trails, probably Carrie's castle since he'd mentioned it to Mary. The initial search is confident. They've got experienced teams, helicopters, search dogs. The dogs pick up Bill's scent heading toward Quail Mountain. Perfect. That matches his plans. They focus the search there. But as hours turn to days, something feels off. They're not finding any of the usual signs. No dropped water bottles, no footprints off trail, no clothing caught on cacti. It's like Bill evaporated. Then, on Sunday morning, June 27th, 3 days after Bill disappeared, something happens that changes everything. Bill's cell phone, which everyone assumed was dead or out of range, sends a single ping to a cell tower. Let me explain why this is huge. Cell phones in 2010 weren't like today's phones. The battery life was maybe 2 days max, especially in heat. For Bill's phone to ping on day 3 means he was either turning it on periodically to save battery, or he'd just reached an area with coverage for the first time. Either way, it meant Bill was likely alive 3 days after disappearing. But here's where it gets weird. The ping hit the Sarin Tower in Yucca Valley, and the signal strength indicated Bill's phone was about 10.6 miles from that tower. Draw a 10-6-mile radius around that tower, and you get an arc that passes through some of the most remote hostile terrain in the park, areas miles away from where everyone was searching. This is where the internet enters the story. Tom Mahood, an engineer and experienced search and rescue volunteer, becomes obsessed with the case. He starts a blog meticulously documenting every search, every theory, every scrap of data. Other hikers join in. They create probability maps, analyze cell tower coverage, develop search grids. It becomes the most crowdsourced missing person investigation in national park history. For 12 years, volunteers search for Bill Owasco. They call themselves Owascologists. They comb canyons that rangers deemed impossible. They use drones, satellite imagery, advanced GPS mapping. They find old mining equipment, other missing hikers' gear, bighorn sheep skeletons. But no Bill Owasco. The leading theory becomes that Bill, an experienced hiker, decided to try something ambitious. Maybe he summited Quail Mountain successfully, then instead of going back the way he came, tried to make a loop through Smithwater Canyon. It's the kind of mistake experienced hikers make, thinking they can handle a shortcut that ends up being anything but short. Think about what that means. Smithwater Canyon is a maze of drainages, false trails, and boulder fields. In June, it's an oven. The rocks are too hot to touch, there's no water, no shade, and most importantly, the canyon systems are what searchers call catchers. Once you descend into certain drainages, the walls are too steep to climb back out. You have to keep going forward, even if forward leads nowhere. February 2022. 12 years after Bill disappeared, 3 hikers are exploring a remote area of Smithwater Canyon. They're in a tributary drainage that's particularly nasty. Steep walls, lots of deadfall, the kind of place you'd only go if you were lost or looking for someone who was lost. They spot something unnatural. A backpack faded by 12 years of sun. Near it, human remains. It's Bill Owasco. The location is staggering. He's found 11.5 miles from his car, almost exactly on that 10.6-mile cell phone ping radius that Tom Mahood had been advocating for years. The internet sleuths were right, but being right doesn't explain how Bill got there or why. Let's talk about what Bill's final journey must have been like. To get from Juniper Flats to where he was found, Bill had to traverse Quail Mountain, a 5,800-foot peak in brutal heat. Then descend into Smithwater Canyon, then travel miles through maze-like drainages. We're talking about minimum 10-11 miles of the hardest hiking imaginable in temperatures over 100 degrees, presumably with limited water. Here's what doesn't make sense. Bill survived long enough to travel that distance. The human body in that heat, at that exertion level, needs roughly a gallon of water every 2 hours. Bill might have been carrying 2 gallons max. That gives him maybe 4 hours of hiking in that heat. But to cover 11 miles of that terrain would take 8-10 hours minimum, even for someone young and fit. So either Bill found water, there is none in Smithwater Canyon in June, or he exhibited superhuman endurance, or, and this is the most likely but still incredible, He survived multiple days, rationing water, moving at night, resting during the heat of the day. The cell phone ping on day 3 supports this theory. Bill wasn't just lost, he was actively trying to save himself for days. But why keep going deeper into the wilderness? Why not turn back? Here's the heartbreaking answer. Bill probably couldn't turn back. Once you descend into certain parts of Smithwater Canyon, the route behind you becomes invisible. The canyon walls all look the same. Every drainage leads to another drainage. It's designed by geology to funnel you deeper, not let you out. Bill was probably following the cardinal rule of being lost: follow water downhill to civilization. Except in Joshua Tree, the drainages don't lead to civilization. They lead to more desert. The location where Bill was found was within 2 miles of Park Boulevard, the main road through the park. He almost certainly could hear traffic, maybe even see car lights at night. But between him and that road was a series of steep canyon walls he couldn't climb. He was so close to rescue, yet completely unreachable. What gets me is the 3-day survival. Bill didn't panic and die quickly. He rationed his resources. He tried to get cell coverage. He kept moving toward what he thought was salvation. Every decision he made was logical. Summit the mountain, descend the canyon, follow the drainage, try to call for help. But in Joshua Tree's alien landscape, logic leads you astray. Tom Mahood, the engineer who spent 12 years searching for Bill, wrote something that haunts me. Bill Iwasco died trying to live. He didn't give up. He didn't sit down and wait. He walked impossible distances through impossible heat because he believed that if he just kept going, he'd find his way out. The desert kept Bill Iwasco for 12 years. When it finally gave him back, it revealed a story of incredible endurance and tragic navigation. He'd walked further than anyone thought possible, survived longer than anyone expected, and died within sight of the road that could have saved him. The cell phone ping that seemed like a clue was actually a goodbye. Bill's last successful attempt to reach the world he was walking away from with every step. The internet sleuths were right about where he was. They just couldn't imagine how far a determined man could walk into hell before hell finally won. Bill Iwasco left for a day hike and ended up walking into eternity. His story reminds us that in places like Joshua Tree, the difference between an adventure and a tragedy is often just one wrong turn in a landscape that doesn't forgive. August 20th, 2004. The Uinta Mountains, Utah. Picture the most pristine wilderness you can imagine: crystal clear alpine lakes reflecting snow-capped peaks, meadows full of wildflowers, the kind of place they put on postcards to sell the American dream. The Cubrant Lake area sits at about 10,000 feet elevation, where the air is so thin and clean it makes your lungs ache. It's Boy Scout country, the perfect place for fathers and sons to bond over campfires and fishing poles. 12-year-old Garrett Bardsley is here with his dad, Kevin, and their Boy Scout troop. This is important. Garrett isn't some neglected kid wandering unsupervised. His father is literally right there with him. They're doing the most wholesome thing imaginable: a father-son fishing trip at a mountain lake on a beautiful Friday morning. Let me tell you about Garrett. He's wearing a bright red sweatshirt, the kind of red that should be visible from space, let alone from 150 yards away. He's got on Nike shoes and white athletic socks. He's 12, which means he's old enough to follow directions but young enough that he still listens to his dad. By all accounts, he's a good kid, not the type to run off, not the type to play pranks, the type who tells his dad he needs to change his socks and then goes to do exactly that. It's about 8 a.m. when it happens. Garrett and his dad are fishing at the edge of Cubrant Lake. If you've never fished in the high mountains, the edges of these lakes are usually muddy, kind of marshy. Your feet sink in. Water seeps through your shoes. That's exactly what happens to Garrett. He steps wrong, maybe slips on a rock, and now his shoes and socks are soaked with that particularly miserable cold mountain water. "Dad, I'm going back to change my socks," he says. Normal kid stuff. The tent is right there, 150 yards up a clear trail. That's nothing. That's the distance from home plate to the outfield fence. That's a 30-second jog for a 12-year-old boy. Kevin says yes, probably barely looking up from his fishing line. Why would he worry? The trail is obvious, the tent is practically visible through the trees. There are other scouts and leaders at the camp. It's broad daylight. What could possibly go wrong in 150 yards? Kevin watches Garrett start walking up the trail. He's moving normally, not running, not upset, just a kid going to change his wet socks. Garrett walks up the slight incline, enters a small stand of trees that blocks the direct view between the lake and camp, and nothing. He never comes out the other side. 15 minutes pass, maybe 20. Kevin finishes with his fishing gear and heads up to camp, probably expecting to find Garrett already changed and maybe eating breakfast with the other scouts. But when he gets to the tent, Garrett's not there. His wet socks aren't there. The other scouts haven't seen him. "Did Garrett come through here?" Kevin asks. "No, we haven't seen him since you guys went fishing." That's when the first cold finger of panic touches Kevin's spine. He probably jogs back to the lake, thinking maybe Garrett went back there, maybe they passed each other somehow. No Garrett. Back to camp. Still no Garrett. Within minutes, everyone is calling Garrett's name. Within an hour, it's a full-scale search. Within hours, it's one of the largest search and rescue operations in Utah history. Now, this is where you need to understand the sheer impossibility of what happened. We're not talking about a vast wilderness where someone could wander for miles. The distance between the lake and the camp is 150 yards. 150 yards. If Garrett had screamed at the lake, they would have heard him at the camp. If he'd screamed at the camp, his dad would have heard him at the lake. The search that follows is massive. We're talking hundreds of volunteers, professional search and rescue teams, helicopters with infrared cameras, mounted search teams, dog teams. The Utah National Guard sends troops. They're not just looking, they're conducting a grid search where people walk shoulder to shoulder through the forest so that not a single square foot goes unchecked. The dogs are important here. Search dogs can follow a human scent trail days after someone passes. They bring in the best dogs available. The dogs pick up Garrett's scent at the lake, follow it a short distance up the trail toward camp, and then they lose it. They circle, confused. The scent just stops. Not fades, stops. As if Garrett just ceased to exist at that spot. Let me explain why this is impossible. Human scent doesn't just vanish. We shed skin cells constantly. Our oils transfer to vegetation we brush against. Our breath leaves particles in the air. For multiple trained dogs to lose a scent trail in clear conditions means either Garrett left the ground at that point, or something interfered with the scent in a way that doesn't happen in nature. Days into the search, they find something. A single white Nike athletic sock found in a boulder field about half a mile from where Garrett disappeared. It's the right size. It matches the type Garrett was wearing. But here's what makes no sense. Just one sock, no shoes, no other clothing, no sign of Garrett. Think about that. Why would a lost 12-year-old boy take off one sock? If your feet are cold and wet, you change both socks. If you're injured and removing clothes, you'd probably remove shoes first. And how did that sock get half a mile away in a boulder field, one of the most difficult terrains to traverse, especially for a kid in one sock? The boulder field is crucial to understanding this mystery. These aren't just rocks. These are massive granite boulders, some the size of cars, jumbled together with deep crevices between them. It's the kind of terrain where you could fall between rocks and never be found. Search teams spend days going through this boulder field, checking every crevice, every possible hiding spot. They find the sock, but no Garrett. Some searchers report hearing what sounds like someone calling Dad during the search, but when they rush to the area, they find nothing. Is it an echo? Is it wishful thinking? Or is it Garrett, trapped somewhere they can't reach, calling until he can't call anymore? The weather turns bad a few days into the search. The temperature drops to 26 degrees at night. Snow begins to fall. If Garrett is alive out there, wearing wet socks and a red sweatshirt, he can't survive these conditions. But the search continues. Here's what drives everyone crazy: the proximity. Kids who get lost in the wilderness usually follow predictable patterns. They go downhill, path of least resistance. They follow water. They try to get to high ground to see landmarks. But Garrett couldn't have done any of these things without being spotted. The area is surrounded by searchers within minutes of his disappearance. The theories are all unsatisfying. Animal attack? No blood, no torn clothing except that one sock, no drag marks. Mountain lions and bears don't carefully remove one sock and carry a child away without leaving a trace. Abduction? By whom? The area is remote, accessed only by a 3-mile hike from the trailhead. What kidnapper hikes 3 miles into the wilderness, hoping to find a child, then manages to grab one silently 150 yards from his father and a Boy Scout troop? Fell in the lake and drowned? They searched the lake thoroughly. Bodies float. Garrett would have been found. The boulder field theory is the most logical, but still doesn't explain everything. Maybe Garrett got disoriented, went the wrong direction, ended up in the boulder field, fell between rocks, and is still there. But why did he go the wrong direction? How did he get so disoriented in 150 yards that he walked half a mile into increasingly difficult terrain? Kevin Bardsley has never stopped searching. Every year he returns to the Uintas. He hikes the trails, he checks the boulder fields, he calls Garrett's name. Other families of missing children have told him to let go, but he can't. How do you let go when your child disappeared in the time it takes to walk to your mailbox and back? There's one detail that haunts me. Garrett's shoes and socks were wet and cold. Any parent knows that wet socks in the mountains are misery for a kid. He wanted to change them, such a simple, reasonable request. His father said yes, such a simple, reasonable response. Everything about that morning was normal until the moment it became impossible. 20 years have passed. The red sweatshirt has never been found. Garrett's other sock has never been found. His shoes have never been found. The largest search in Utah history found exactly one sock in a place that made no sense. Somewhere in that 150 yards between the lake and the tent, something happened to Garrett Bardsley that defies explanation. He entered those trees as a cold, wet 12-year-old boy looking forward to dry socks. He never came out. The space between 2 points of safety became an impossible void that swallowed him completely. The Uinta Mountains are beautiful. They're also vast and unforgiving, full of hidden crevices and sudden drop-offs. But Garrett didn't disappear in the vast wilderness. He disappeared in the space between here and there. In the distance, a father can watch his son walk. In the most impossible place to get lost. He was 150 yards from his tent, 150 yards from his dad, 150 yards from warmth and dry socks. It should have taken him 2 minutes to get there. 20 years later, his father is still waiting for him to arrive. The mountains kept Garrett Bardsley. They kept him so completely that even they seem to have forgotten where they put him. Picture this. It's February 24th, 1978, a Friday night in Chico, California. The air smells like beer and hot dogs, and the crowd at Cal State is electric. 5 friends from Yuba City are in the stands, cheering their hearts out at a college basketball game. They're happy, they're excited. They have their own Special Olympics basketball tournament tomorrow morning. Uniforms already laid out at home, alarms set. These weren't just any 5 guys. The families called them the Boys, and they were inseparable. Ted Wire, 32, the gentle giant who still lived with his mom. Jack Madruga, 30, the responsible one who owned the car, a turquoise 1969 Mercury Montego he babied like it was made of gold. Bill Sterling, 29, deeply religious and devoted to his family. Jack Hewitt, 24, the youngest, always following the other's lead. And then there was Gary Mathias, 25, the wild card, an Army veteran with schizophrenia who needed his medication to stay stable. Now, here's what you need to understand about these men. They all had mild intellectual disabilities or mental health conditions. They met through a vocational rehabilitation program. They bowled together. They attended basketball games together. Their families knew exactly where they were at all times because these were men of routine. Men who called home if they were 5 minutes late. Men who never, ever missed an important event. The game ends around 10 p.m. Chico State wins. The boys are pumped. They stop at Bears Market. Witnesses see them buying snacks. Hostess pies, chocolate milk, Snickers bars. Normal stuff for the 50-mile drive home to Marysville down Highway 70. A straight shot. An easy drive Jack Madruga had made 100 times. But here's where the story takes a hard left turn. Actually, a hard right. Instead of heading south toward home, they drive east. Not just a little east, we're talking 70 miles in the opposite direction, up into the Plumas National Forest, in February at night, up a rough mountain road that would make any car owner cringe. Let me paint you a picture of where they went. The Plumas National Forest in winter isn't some scenic wonderland. It's a hostile, frozen maze of logging roads and wilderness. The temperature that night, below freezing. The road they took, unpaved, rocky, covered in snow the higher you climb. This is the kind of road you avoid in perfect weather, let alone in the middle of the night in winter. On February 25th, a forest ranger finds the Mercury Montego abandoned on that mountain road. The car is just sitting there, stuck in some snow, sure, but barely stuck. The kind of stuck where 5 grown men could rock it free in 30 seconds. The gas tank, quarter full. The engine, perfectly fine. It started right up when they hot-wired it. But here's what really makes investigators scratch their heads. The windows were rolled down. In sub-freezing temperatures, the keys were gone. But strangest of all, Jack Madruga's prized car, the one he never let anyone else drive, the one he washed every weekend, had somehow navigated miles of brutal mountain road without a scratch on the undercarriage. Think about that. This suggests they drove slowly, carefully, deliberately up that mountain, not fleeing, not panicked, just going. Now, this is where Joseph Shans enters the story. And trust me, his testimony is going to haunt you. Shans was a guy from Berry Creek who got stuck in his car on that same road that same night. He's sitting there, having a mild heart attack from the stress when he sees headlights coming up behind him. He gets out, tries to call for help. The lights go out immediately. Then, and this is the part that gives me chills, he hears whistling. Multiple people whistling. He sees what he thinks are a woman and a baby, though it's dark, and he's panicking. He calls out again. Silence. Whatever he saw, whoever was whistling, they didn't want to help. They wanted to hide. But wait, we haven't even gotten to the truly inexplicable part yet. June 1978. The snow melts. Search teams have been combing the forest for months. Finally, in a Forest Service trailer, 19 miles from where the car was abandoned, and get this, most of it uphill, they find Ted Wire. Let's talk about the condition they found him in, because this is where your brain is going to break trying to make sense of it. Ted had been alive for somewhere between 8 and 13 weeks after they disappeared. His beard had grown out. He'd lost nearly 100 pounds. He was wrapped in 8 sheets, dead from exposure and starvation. But here's the thing that makes zero logical sense. Ted Wire starved to death inside a trailer that contained enough food to keep all 5 men alive for a year. I need you to really think about that. The trailer was stocked with sea rations, military surplus food. There were dozens of cans. There was a locker they hadn't opened that was full of more food. Outside, there was a full propane tank that could have heated the trailer. Inside, there were matches, books, wood furniture they could have burned. They had everything they needed to survive. So what did they do? They opened exactly 5 cans of food. That's it. 5 cans for a man who lived there for 2 months, and they opened them with a P-38 military can opener, the kind only Gary Mathias would have known how to use from his Army days. But then, they just stopped eating. Ted wrapped himself in every sheet he could find and lay down on a bed to die, surrounded by enough supplies to keep him alive until summer. Why didn't he turn on the heat? Why didn't he eat the food? It's like watching someone die of thirst while sitting next to a water fountain. And it gets weirder. They found some of the other boys too. Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga's remains were discovered about 11 miles from the car. Jack Hewitt's backbone was found even further. All of them had walked incredible distances through deep snow in street clothes. We're talking about men in light jackets and sneakers traversing the same terrain that experienced hikers with proper gear struggle with. But Gary Mathias? He vanished completely, except for one detail. His tennis shoes were in the trailer, his shoes, but not him. Which means at some point, Gary was there with Ted, took off his shoes, and then... what? Walked out barefoot into the snow? Switched shoes with someone? Remember, this is the guy with military training, the guy with schizophrenia who needed medication he definitely didn't have with him. Let me break down why none of the theories work. Theory 1. They got lost. Okay, but lost people don't carefully drive 70 miles up a mountain road. Lost people turn around when they realize they're going the wrong way. And even if they got lost, why abandon a working car with gas and heat? Theory 2. They were running from something. Joseph Shans, maybe they thought he was a threat. But Shans was having a heart attack in his car. He needed help. And even if they were scared of him, why walk 19 miles deeper into the forest instead of back toward civilization? Theory 3. Gary Mathias had a psychotic break and led them up there. This almost makes sense until you realize they found evidence Mathias was operating rationally enough to open cans with military precision. And the others weren't his prisoners. They could have walked back down the mountain at any point during those weeks Ted was alive in the trailer. Here's what really keeps me up at night about this case. These men had a basketball tournament the next morning. They were excited about it. Their uniforms were laid out at home. Ted's mother said he wouldn't miss it for the world. These weren't impulsive guys who would just decide to go on a mountain adventure. And then there's the rule-following aspect. These were men who'd been told their whole lives to follow rules, to listen to authority, to not take things that didn't belong to them. Is it possible they found that trailer, knew it was government property, and literally chose to starve rather than steal government food? It sounds insane, but remember, we're talking about men with cognitive limitations who might not have been able to override that programming even to save their lives. Some investigators think they witnessed something they shouldn't have seen. Drug deal gone bad? Murder? Something that made them run so far and so fast that they chose death over being found? The area was known for marijuana grows in the 70s, but nothing explains the passive death in that trailer. Nothing explains why Ted Wire sat there for 2 months, growing thinner and thinner, surrounded by food he wouldn't eat and heat he wouldn't turn on. The Yuba County 5 case is often called America's Dyatlov Pass, but I think it's worse. Those Russian hikers died quickly in a blizzard. These men died slowly, by choice, surrounded by everything they needed to live. They didn't die from the cold or the mountains. They died from something broken in the human programming itself, some psychological lock that kept them from saving themselves, even when salvation was literally at their fingertips. 5 men drove into the darkness of the Plumas National Forest and simply let go, and we'll never know why. The boys never made their basketball game.